Welcome, everyone. This is an opportunity to address the coming month of February and March transits, which are very interesting given that we are already in the eclipse season. The first eclipse is going to be February 17 at 28 Aquarius. 2 weeks later, March 3rd, is the second lunar eclipse at 12 Virgo Pisces. So eclipse always come in pairs, solar, lunar. I want to direct you to another video, the year 2026 on my YouTube channel, where I go into greater depth into the eclipse. So revisit that. Another two videos that I recommend are Saturn in Aries, because it's happening on February 13th. Saturn move definitively into the sign of Aries, and Neptune has moved into Aries 10 days ago. So another video for that. And we've talked a lot about them together, which is obviously happening before our eyes right now. But keep in mind that as we move into April, May, they're going to really be separating from one another. And so it's important to understand their meanings individually. Neptune will be in Aries for 14 years. So the meeting with Saturn is now. It's happening this month. I would also like to invite you to a very special event, February 13. I call it Fab 8 for Feb 13. We're having a gathering with fellow astrologers, and we're each going to present about the coming transits and about other topics. For example, Owner Doser is going to speak about the eclipses, and Ariel Gutman's going to speak about the equinox chart, which is about the new year. It's the chart that sets the tone for the whole year, zero Aries. And Lynn Bell is going to speak about the Black Moon Lilith. Now, keep in mind that the Black Moon Lilith is a concept that was instigated by a French astrologer. And she lives in France and is very close to that. So I'm really curious to see her take on it. Now, this event is a fundraising for our colleague from Greece. Her name is Angela Tiki, and recently, end of January, a massive flood just destroyed her home and the whole infrastructure. So, what we see in the videos where cars are just floating and drifting away, this is what happened, with this Neptune and 28, 29 Pisces. So I hope you're going to be joining us, because it's a great event, but it's also a fundraising for her. And, tickets are $35 for this amazing faculty. Please make a difference, show up, because as she is telling it, her knees are broken from scrapping and trying to clean her floors for days now. She can't work and she needs our help. So find out more about it at fundraisersangela.org. So to our matters, like I said, 2026, we've already touched on it, but I want to be more specific about the coming weeks, because we can get more into details about the intricacies. So much is packed into these coming, 6 weeks. Now, we see with this conjunction, this is something I've been repeating and repeating, and you've heard me through, those of you who are familiar with my work, how the Saturn Neptune has eroded our justice system, our institutions, and we are in a morally bankrupt time. Morality is Saturn, and Neptune is eroding it. So there's some kind of lawlessness. Everything goes. And we see that just as they come together, one of the manifestations is we see how all these folks showing up in the Epstein file, the Deepak Chopra and the Noam Chomsky, it's not just the politicians, it's people who, we thought were luminaries. So this kind of fall from grace, this loss of morality, is definitely activated by the Epstein files. And this aspect, has been lingering this whole period of time. So what else will happen in the course of February? Who are we going to see, some of these invincible rocks, seemingly above it all, who are going to be involved in scandals? I will say the most difficult transit for a politician is a Neptune-Saturn aspect. Usually the opposition is the most brutal. And guess who's having one? Yes. Trump has his Neptune early Libra. So he's going to have an opposition in his 8th house. Now, the reason is that Neptune again brings a loss of control. So it is a time where you have to navigate, the rug being slipped from under, or suddenly being caught in a quicksand effect. So there's something on a political level, but it's not just politicians. It's people who, in our personal lives and in the public life, we thought were reliable, were strong, and we see them vulnerable, can be health issues. And the most critical thing is that there could be a moral scandal, something that really affects credibility. And it's very sad. It's traumatizing. I can't watch any longer, this guy's face, this Epstein monster is everywhere, plastered. It's good that it raises awareness, but how toxic, this all is, and we're exposed to this garbage. So let's stand together to basically sail through this, and hopefully it's worth it. That it is going to bring accountability, repair, and healing. Now, this month is also the eclipse month. As I mentioned in the 2026 video, the eclipse of February 17 is rising in Washington, D.C. It's very strategic in Trump's chart. It's going to square Uranus, the ruler of Aquarius. So there could be a lot of dynamics that affect finances and that affect alliances, groups. On a personal level, it can be something about our social life, about organizations, the organization of astrologers, the organization of protesters, of the MAGA movement, all kinds of groups that are allies. So with this eclipse in Aquarius, and it's the first in this era, we may see changes in those social structures. Who's going to be our friend? Who are we joining? And where are we retreating? There could be unexpected twists and turns and surprises. And this can obviously occur on a geopolitical level as well. where new alliances, new treaties are forming when older alliances are dissolving. Eclipses is always a time of greater fate, higher intervention, a feeling that we're not fully in control of what's happening, and it's happening fast. So there's acceleration, and we already feel it because how we determine eclipse season, this is part of the importance of this video, is when the sun gets closer to the nodes. So when the sun is about 15 to 10 degrees close to the nodes stop moving. They become stationary. They go forward, back on the same degree, rattling. And that is only occurring when you have a true node measurement. Another video to plug in here, if you want to finally understand whether to use mean nodes or true nodes in your chart, this explains it. And for eclipse measurement, as the node frees on a particular degree, we have this nodal degree being extremely strategic, because imagine that you have a planet on 8 degrees Virgo or Pisces. You're going to have the nodes on it, fate, higher intervention, rattling energy, vortex energy on that planet. It starts to dominate. It becomes the center of attention. So this time, 8 Pisces Virgo is part of the equation. And we're going to see how this month is going to be strategic for that degree, because one by one, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars are going to meet the North Node. So anyone here with 8 degrees Pisces, anything, you're on the spot. And that can be for good reason. So I don't want you to worry or feel that it's daunting or anything. The lunar eclipse coming up soon after on March 3rd at 12 Virgo Pisces can affect, as it has already, employment, anything that has to do with both finding new employment opportunities, relinquishing old positions. So there's some kind of rotation. There may be a change of leadership at work. But we know that the bigger issue, just like is happening now in all these billionaire-led companies, and including government, where they are laying off hundreds, thousands of people and replacing them with AI and robots. This is happening now with the Washington Post, where Jeff Bezos has gutted a third of the reporters there. So, he's investing heavily into artificial intelligence. We'll see where that goes. So something is being transformed. And I said it earlier, every time there's a technological revolution, whether it was, the late 18th century with the Industrial Revolution and the steam engines, or more recently with the Internet revolution, there's always a change of employment because machines are replacing humans. This happens in the 1800s. But we have to remember that as old jobs are disappearing, new jobs are being created. You did not have a psychologist in the 18th century, and you did not have, a computer engineer in the 18th century. So as new technology comes in and jobs are eliminated, replaced by machines, the likelihood that new functions, new roles for humans will eventually emerge is part of the deal. But the transition period is really hard. And these eclipses in Virgo Pisces have everything to do with employment. Now, some are saying, if we hear the TED Talks and some of the prophets, and putting this on quotation mark because I don't know how reliable it is, but they speak of a future where humans won't have to work and that machines will perform all the functions. I don't know if this is where we're going. I don't know what that's going to do to our brains if we're not working and we're just, collecting welfare. But some things are changing. We know that this year, with all these outer planet movements, we know that things are being seeded for a longer term future, which we don't have the perspective yet. But as astrologers, we already, have that kind of bird eye view and can anticipate where it's headed. So in Virgo Pisces, watch your health as well. Maybe New Year resolutions, eclipse resolutions to take better care of your health, of your diet, of exercise, and generally lifestyle, really take good care of yourself. You deserve it. Virgo Pisces is also, this balance between activity and rest. Pisces is sleep. Virgo is, performance and output and harvest. So think about vacation. Think about um, managing the rhythm as everything goes so fast and changes so quickly. How is your system adjusting to that? One of the things I also want to highlight is in this context, of course, join astrology retreats. We're having these fabulous events, one in upstate New York at Omega Institute, and one in Greece. So whether you're in Europe or you are in the United States, these are soul recharge, community connection, in person, organic activation, which are so important for our nervous system, but also for a time where we're going through so much trauma and bombarded with insecurity, with violence. I think it's important to recharge and to connect. And, this may sound like a commercial that I want to sell my retreats, but think about, why do I do these retreats? I could make money doing other things more easily. So it's part of the service to offer a quality event that can change people's lives. Now, speaking of Pisces and all these activation that we're talking about, so when we look not just at ourselves individually, but on the leadership level, those who want to overly control what's going on, the narrative, no, you won't have an investigation. No, you're going to say this and that. So, this kind of management, micromanaging everything doesn't work with Pisces, eclipses, and energy. And this is true for all of us, that the tighter we're trying to hold our grip, the more leakages, the more things get out of hand. And so the smart move is to learn to improvise, is to learn to adapt, and to be very attentive to every cue that's around you. You need to learn to dance. You need to learn to swim because the waves are getting bigger and you won't win against a wave. You have to surf, ride that wave, not fight it. So that's, a side note, so to speak. We're entering this Mercury retrograde season. Some of you may have seen some of my reports about that on Instagram, Maurice Fernandez Instagram. Um, Mercury is going to be retrograde from February 23rd until the equinox, until March 23rd. And it's a very interesting Mercury retrograde because, number one, it's in Pisces. And as we already said, Pisces is not detail oriented, it's big picture. It looks at the larger strokes. It's not about micromanaging. So already you can't be too attached to things. You have to understand what the concept is, what this is about. Let's make it work rather than, cross every T and dot every I. So with Mercury retrograde, this intensifies this more big picture perspective because the message of Mercury retrograde is you're not going to follow the exact plan. There's going to be an adjustment. One of the best way to understand Mercury retrograde is you have to take the path less traveled. It can be a very successful experience if you're willing to try things that you haven't done before. So Mercury retrograde is about stepping out of the autopilot. When you're used to your routine and you do everything sequentially, and you're kind of habituated to certain schedules or habits, the retrograde kind of pokes you and nudges you to go sideways, to take your machete and carve a new pathway so that you may find new things. You may look at your life from a different angle. So those who are more adventurous, who are willing to think outside the box, are going to make incredible discoveries, are going to meet, incredible new people because that kind of improvisation and trying out new things is encouraged during Mercury retrograde. When we say don't sign contracts or don't buy things during Mercury retrograde, this is only true if you're not stepping outside the box. But some of the most successful purchases can be during a Mercury retrograde if you are in tune with the rhythm and you let life dialogue with you rather than you impose your script and your narrative. Hope that makes sense. So when we look at the retrograde season, what we pay attention to is not just the station when it starts and when it ends, but also that middle point when Mercury retrogrades and hits the sun. That's the midpoint of the retrograde. That's going to be March 7th. Mercury and Sun are going to be at 16 degrees Pisces. That day, March 7th, also has a Venus-Neptune 1 degree Aries conjunction. So the ruler of Pisces with Venus. So it's a big day with these two important personal to transpersonal conjunctions. And, there's something very poetic about it. There's something very romantic about it, very creative, artistic. It can be a day of decisions. It can be a day of, important alliances. Or maybe, you're going to have again this incredible meal that is going to blow your mind surprisingly. So what happens during this time is the higher your expectations, the less you get. The more you are cool and flexible and come blank without expectations, the more interesting things can get. But now it's hard to do that, to force yourself not to have expectations. But what I'm saying is that the goodies are not coming from the front door. They're coming from the windows and what you pay initially the least attention to may become the thing that's actually going to turn out great. But yeah, Mercury retrograde in Pisces, getting lost, losing material things, schedule issues, that's part of the package. Make sure your valuables are more secure. Make sure that you are not distracted when it comes to emergency. As I said in another video, not the time to have a surgery, because this is not a time for precision, for micromanaging. Maybe energy healing would be good, but not, something that requires surgical precision. So the other interesting thing is that as Mercury continues its retrograde motion, it's going to station and then go direct. But this time, it stations around March 17 until 23, and it is going to be exactly on the North Node. So Mercury kind of, as the node station on that 8-degree Pisces, so does Mercury. And so they kind of freeze and hang out for several days together. And this is accompanied by other planets who are each in turn going to cross the North Node. So we start, let's backpedal. February 11, Mercury makes his first pass on the North Node 8 Pisces. A few days later, February 16, Venus conjuncts the North Node, and that's the eclipse day, 17. So as we have an eclipse at 28 Aquarius, we also have a Venus North Node in Pisces. Venus, as we said, anything that's on the North Node has a fated nature, is accelerated, intensified, amplified. So there's a kind of a vortex energy around that, which means for Venus in Pisces, there could be new encounters, relationships, meeting people. There could be changes in existing relationships. There could be financial rewards. But it could also mean that there's some kind of unexpected revelation about relationships. There could also be surprising twists and turns with money, whether coming in or unexpected expenses. So, we know Bitcoin, for example, is going crazy these days, plummeting. Will that Venus on the North Node change that trend, reverse the course? Right after Venus comes Pallas Athena. This is a major asteroid that, interestingly, like Mercury, is very cerebral. It's very much about strategy. And it is in Pisces. So we see water and strategy. Does that mean that there could be negotiations or defense strategies associated with waterways, ships? Something about this whole Pisces energy can bring attention to the oceans, to boats and cruises. And Pallas Athena is not only strategic, she's also related to combat and warfare. And I mentioned in the 2026 video that Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, is going to have this eclipse on his Mars, which is war. So he's going to have Pallas Athena, the female warrior, opposing his Mars, the male warrior. Something is happening with the United States war strategy around these eclipses. Iran comes to mind. We know they're negotiating, but we also know that everything's very unpredictable. Soon after Pallas Athena, the sun moves on the north node. Now, I mentioned as the sun gets closer to the nodes, we enter this eclipse season where everything is morphing and vortexing and swirling and accelerating. And so that is kind of a climax. We have the eclipses happening, but then the sun locking on the actual degree of the nodes, that 8 degrees Pisces. And the sun is the power, the leader, our sense of purpose. So this can be a time where we can shine, where we can release, where we can birth something new. But it could also be a time where there's a rotation of leadership. Someone needs to leave, somebody else comes in. Think about eclipses. As sometimes it eclipses something out of your life. And then it creates a void and replaces it. So solar energy has to do with your meaning and purpose and what you want to do with your life. So what has fate in store for you, right? Now, 2 weeks later, Mars is on the north node, and we go back to this tension around combat. So it's very confusing in a way from an astrological point of view, because Pisces is generally a sign that represents union and pacifying energy. And Venus on the North Node also brings a sense of allying with, connecting with. But then Mars and Pallas taking their turn to be on the North Node speak about confrontation. And because it's in Pisces, it's tricky because it's not a confrontation that is always frontal. It's not always visible. It can be insidious. It can be invisible enemies. So, who knows? Hopefully it's not going to be, pathogens and recalls and contaminations. But there is a risk of invisible threats, microscopic threats. There is also, with all these Pisces, when we speak about the risk of combat, it is fueled with ideology. There's fanaticism that can come from ideologies, the use of force fueled by and justified by ideology. We also understand that as we speak about these vortexes, Pisces represents the forces of nature. I just mentioned my friend having her house flooded. All this energy can also bring natural events. Now, I just want to bring to your attention, as all these planets are basically crossing the North Node, they gain distance from the sun, and that means they are also visible in the sky. You often see on social media these fake announcements that look at the sky, there's this, Mars is as big as the moon, or on that particular day there's this incredible lineup of planets, and it's usually fake. I don't know why people spend time creating this enthusiasm just to deceive for no reason. They're not extracting money from it. They are just taking pleasure um, to disrupt, to confuse, and to generate attention. But there is an interesting alignment that is happening on March 19, where Venus is going to be just enough distance from the sun to start being visible as a evening star. So you see in this graphic that the sun, the green line is the horizon. So the sun is setting and Venus starts to be visible in the night sky after sunset. And Mercury is going to be at its maximum distance from the sun prior to the retrograde. So it's also visible in the sky. And Saturn happens to be there with Neptune. Neptune is not visible with a naked eye, but if you have a telescope, it's going to be there. And then the moon is going to be just, joining that Saturn Neptune. And we have this triple conjunction, which is interesting. And so the moon is going to start with its crescent phase. And in the following day, the moon is going to continue to be visible in the sky until it meets Jupiter, on the other side of the sky. So you have this grouping on the west horizon, and Jupiter is more towards the east, and the moon will join it. So for a few days, there can be a very beautiful celestial spectacle that captures this sequence of planets moving on the North Node. As far as the eclipses, the solar eclipse is not going to be visible in most parts of the world. Actually, 2026, most of the eclipses are occurring close to the poles, so they're not immediately visible. This solar eclipse is going to be visible only in Spain, interestingly. But the lunar eclipse is going to be visible in most places in the United States and Australia. So Hawaii and the whole Pacific Islands in Japan, this is the map where you can have a really beautiful side of the moon turning red, because that's part of the eclipse phenomena. And because it's a total eclipse, it's going to be a spectacle. It is going to be a visually stunning. Now, how does this affect us individually, sign by sign? As you know, this is not just sun sign astrology. We're talking about cycles, but I just want to place it in the different houses. If you're an Aries rising or Aries sun, all this is going to happen in your 12th house because that's where your Pisces lies. So Aries people have a lot of 12th house activity during this time, which means a lot of sacrifices. They need to be present, but they may not feel like they can take action as soon as they would like to. So there's a bit of a waiting period for their own project, but they may be called to duty. So there's something more important than your plans that grabs your attention to other matters that you could not anticipate, that you cannot plan ahead. So that whole flexibility, wait time, see what the tide is bringing is even stronger for Aries people. For Taurus, it's going to affect social interactions. There may be friends who need your help, or there may be interesting social activities where, in a very simple way, you may find friends who will engage you with spiritual conversations. If you're going to an astrology conference, an astrology event, and you have this strong Taurus signature, this can be a highlight. This can be a time of great meeting of minds. For the Geminis, this happens in their 10th house, so it has to do with responsibilities and maybe again a call to duty. So um, perhaps Geminis again will need to, as we say, take the higher road. It's not necessarily about their needs, but about the greater needs. And there could be disruptions in professional matters. If I mention maybe at work, there's a change of leadership, maybe a rotation of sort, um, that could affect the Geminis more prominently. For Cancers, this happens in the 9th house, so it's all about education, maybe a change of plans, maybe a new course and class, and something that is very vitalizing academically, spiritually. So it's a great time for spiritual studies, but it may also be a time where there are disruptions in those areas. And speaking of spiritual retreats, if this whole Pisces activity happens for Cancer risings and Cancer suns, this is a time to actually sign up or join a retreat because it's very auspicious for that particular angle. Leo is going to happen in their 8th house, which is obviously related to a feeling of lack. I'm not meeting my goals, the feeling that you're running short, the feeling that you don't get the recognition that you anticipated. So there's a lot of brainstorming about how to advance, what needs to change in order for you to break through, to gain new ground, to revitalize yourself. So there's a bit of shadow work, there's a bit of consolidation needed, and sorting, what stays, what goes. Pay attention to trust during this time with all this 8th house. Who can you trust? Don't be naive. Virgo, it happens in their 7th house, so that can open them up to new connection, new relationships. So Virgo rising and Virgo suns, interesting relationship development. That could also mean that if you are already in a relationship, your partner may go through uh, some kind of transition, professional transition. Maybe they need to take a break. Maybe you need to talk about how you handle your relationships, communication problems. With Mercury retrograde in your 7th house, be open to changes. Be open to listening rather than telling. Libra, it's in your 6th house, so that will affect, again, professional matters, um, colleagues needing help, new dynamics at work. It may demand a lot out of you, so there could be sacrifices that need to be made, extra hours, but it could also mean that you need to set boundaries because there's a risk here of being dragged into professional duty in ways that may not be balanced. And Libra is all about balance. Health, watch your immune system. wear your mask if you're in public places because there's a greater risk of contamination, and we are in this in-between season where the bugs are celebrating. It's their time. So you want to be more cautious about any kind of contamination. Scorpio in your fifth house, so your big projects. This can be a time where you need to recalibrate how you want to move forward, but you have goals. There are plans. Maybe some things will need to be canceled. Pay attention to that. Regarding your kids, if you have kids with Scorpio rising, Scorpio sun, they may show up at your door because um, there's a breakup. Their spouses or partners left them, or suddenly, they're laid off, or um, change of plans, and they may need now some support. Sagittarius, it's in your fourth house. So you could retreat, and say, world, I'm staying home now. I am not engaging into full activity. It's a time for rest. But it could also be a time where parents or someone at home needs your attention. There could be domestic needs, duties, sacrifices. So, um, whether you need self-care or whether someone around you in your immediate environment needs self-care, it's self-care time. A Capricorn, it's in your third house, so that applies to education as well, knowledge, studies. It's a great time to, again, join classes, learn something new, and sibling issues, reconnect with siblings. Siblings may need help. Be careful about things that are unsaid. The dangerous silence. Check on whoever's not showing up for you. But otherwise, it's a cultural adventure in the third house. Aquarius in your second house, so that has to do with resources and financial management. So watch your stuff. If we mention uh, losing your wallet, and in both literally and metaphorically, there could be a lot of deviation with finances. And yeah, trust issues with money, unexpected changes, unexpected expenses, but then also like tune into where the opportunity is, because it may not be from the person that you initially betted on. It can come, money can come from another place. The second house is also, your inner sanctuary, your temple. So this can also be a time for retreat for Aquarian. Um, not having to engage as much in the rat race, but be in nature. A solitary time can be healthy. And for Pisces, happy birthday, both Aquarius and Pisces. So this can be a time where there are new resolution, new, decisions. Be open. You are usually open. So, it's not a lesson for Piscean to learn to adapt. You are doing that as second nature. But this can be a very interesting developmental phase. But because of the retrograde and all this eclipse and Mars activity, there could be a lot of going forward and then backtracking, cancellations. So if your plans cancel, what's the backup plan? How do you improvise? In other words, it's a very creative time, but it is prone to deviations and requires that level of flexibility. And yet, celebrate. Celebrate in a Piscean way, celebrate in good self-care, in not too much alcohol, but maybe you swim in the ocean, swimming with dolphins. How does that sound for Mercury, Venus on the North Node in Pisces? Part of the gift of this season is that humans are not in charge, and that's maybe a good thing. That there's something of a higher nature taking over. And that's why it can feel a bit wobbly, but it may be for the best.